questions for you. One, were you aware of and did you personally approve the prison transfer for Ghislaine Maxwell that your Justice Department?
I didn't know about it at all. No, I read about it just like you did.
And do you believe that she is?
It's not a very uncommon thing.
Do you believe that she's credible to be listening to? Your Deputy Attorney General sat down with her recently.
Well, let me tell you, he's a very talented man. His name is Todd Blanche. He's a very legitimate person, very high. I just a very highly thought of person, respected by everybody. And I didn't talk to him about it, but I will tell you that whatever he asked would be totally appropriate, and it's not an uncommon thing to do that. And I think he probably wants to make sure that, people that should not be involved or aren't involved are not hurt by something that would be very, very unfortunate, very unfair to a lot of people.
You can't police people for being anti-Israel or pro-Israel. You can police people for violating the law, and we have seen some of that with some of these protests.
Okay, so you agree that people who break in and vandalize a building should be prosecuted?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just checking because you did help raise money for people who did so on January 6th, which was, impeding an official proceeding, breaking into a building that they weren't allowed to be in, and vandalizing the Capitol.
Well, Kaitlan, I know that this is the obsession of the national media to talk about what happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago on January the 6th.
It's not an obsession. I'm just seeing if it's a double standard.
No, let me answer the question, Kaitlan. I mean, look, here's been my basic argument about January the 6th. If you beat up a cop, of course you deserve to go to prison. If you violated the law, you should suffer the consequences. But there are people who protested on January the 6th who have had the complete weight of the Justice Department thrown at them when, at worst, they're accused of misdemeanors. Now, again, there are people who are accused of worse offenses, and that's a problem. But you can't have Black Lives Matter protesters who rioted and vandalized go free when you have people who were actually peacefully protesting on January the 6th who have the book thrown at them. That's the double standard that I'm most worried about.
Yeah, I don't think there's an obsession with January 6th, but it is a legitimate question. And given what you just said there, and as Trump is getting closer to, as he's a presumptive Republican nominee, he has said he would pardon, he's considered a blanket pardon for everyone on January 6th. Are you saying that shouldn't happen? People who beat up cops should be excluded from that?
Well, I think what President Trump has said, and of course he can speak for himself, but I pay pretty close attention to what he says. And I think what the president has said is that people who have this double standard applied to them should be pardoned. Which
White House official made the decision to bar the AP reporter from the Oval Office and the diplomatic reception room last night?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day and getting to ask the President questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office, and you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because the reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that align with the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about?
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable.
Sure. Kaitlan. I have two questions for you. One on the flights, but first on the president's post overnight, saying that the pardons that were issued by President Biden preemptively to members of the January 6th committee, that they're now null and void. Have attorneys here at the White House told President Trump that he has the legal authority to undo a pardon simply because it was signed by auto pen, as he said?
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Kaitlan. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent.
Is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden
Is
White
there any
House.
evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out.
I notice you're able to not take the bait of the moment. You stay on what you're doing. Trump can say, that's a dumb question. Nobody watches you. But you don't seem to take the bait. Is that something you have worked on, or is that something that is part of your personality?
I truly don't think there's anything that the president could say to me that would really surprise me, because I'm so familiar with, kind of his tactics or how he is. I mean, he did this at our town hall. This happened before when he kicked me out of an Oval event, when he wouldn't let me go to any other events at the White House because he didn't like the questions asked in an Oval Office event. It's often a tactic, I think, and a deflection tactic in terms of not wanting to answer the question. And so, I also think that as a reporter, you kind of have to go into these moments prepared for anything. And if you really are, and you're not expecting to be treated super nicely and for them to call on you and everyone to, wait for you to get your question out and assume that you're operating in good faith. If you go into it kind of ready for that, then, nothing can really throw you off. And I think truly also you'll have to remember, what are you doing there? You're there to ask a question. I'm not there to get in a back and forth with the president about, ratings or my credibility or whether he likes me or doesn't like me that day.
Right.
The point is, because that's a distraction from asking about the person who, the administration admitted was wrongly deported, and what are they doing with that? And so I think that's always kind of just my goal is to not get thrown off of what I'm going in there to do, which is my job.
Neither Kaitlan Leavitt nor anybody within the current White House press corps or around his public relations apparatus has the ability to make Donald Trump or his administration appear confident or like they're delivering on any of his promises that he guaranteed in his 2024 campaign. And because they have no ability to make Donald Trump look good at this point, they just let people like Tim Pool into the press hall so that he can ask questions and be a sycophant and lick Trump's balls, like they always do. But Donald Trump, post-stroke Trump, I must just call him PST from now on, since he's come out, he's gotten right back to lying every time he opens his mouth. We've added $17 trillion worth of investments since passing the big, beautiful bill. $5 trillion in stocks, $5 trillion here. A billion, trillion, gazillion jobs have been added since I became president. And he's going along dragging his foot. The Epstein case will not leave him alone. Inflation is getting worse. The prices of goods, produce is getting higher. He's broken his promises about not escalating any of the wars when he bombed Iran. And Israel's involvement in Israel's attacks on Iran have not stopped. So we're just not talking about it in the broader media. But this opened up a can, Donald Trump did, and it hasn't stopped. And of course, no matter what Israel does, the United States is going to back it, whether or not we have a Republican or a Democrat in office. But Donald Trump, he's just so ridiculous, and he's failing every which way. He's cut programs that people depend on, research initiatives that people all around the world depend on. And he's just souring our relationships. Modi from India won't even pick up the phone for him anymore. So Kaitlan Leavitt has no ability to cover this up. Your new job, your new person with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you're not going to release the job numbers now. I wonder why. People ain't that stupid.